century, Jews from the Iberian Peninsula started to trickle into Eretz Israel, or Terra Santa, as the Sephardim called it, or Palestine, as present-day Israel was known throughout the 17th and 18th century. The trickle turned into a steady flow after the expulsion of the Spanish Jews in 1492. The first wave of Sephardic Jews went to North Africa, Italy, the Ottoman Empire, and some Jews decided to settle in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, of course, always had a big attraction for people, but it was hard to live there. The Ottoman Empire and the Sultan were most welcome for Jews, but local leaders tended to be much less positive towards the Jew, and they were even cruel. There was an economic underdevelopment, and there was a harsh climate, hot and humid, making it hard to live there. The second wave of Sephardim went from Portugal to several places, among them Amsterdam and later to London. And the Amsterdam community started to develop in the beginnings of the 17th century. And they bought a cemetery, they started several charities, and they started recording their activities. And the first documentary evidence we have for support for Israel is from 1616. That's over 4 centuries ago. And that support more or less never stopped, apart from the Second World War, which put an end to many things. Support for Israel is a mitzvah, but there's another motive why Amsterdam wanted to give towards Israel, and it was because they were former Catholics. They came to Amsterdam as former Catholics, and some of them had knowledge of Judaism in abundance, but others who had to receive an education into Judaism to be able to fit in. And the Amsterdam community felt insecure of itself. And they tried to prove themselves to the world by giving to Eretz Israel. And this was one of the 2 mitzvahs that they established to help Jews in other countries. And the other one was the mitzvah of cautivos, or the freeing of prisoners. And that one also goes back to 1616. So it started 400 years of support. And this is maybe the first evidence that we have for that support. And it's in the second line where it says that the Amsterdam community donated 92 guilders towards Eretz Israel, it says. You can spell Eretz Israel in many ways. Okay. So these communities in Amsterdam, there were 3 of them, and their archives have been haphazardly preserved. From each community there's a little bit of something, but it's incomplete. But even from those records, it's clear that those Portuguese Jews in Amsterdam cared about Eretz Israel, and each of the 3 communities had its own gabbai for Eretz Israel. One of those is Bet Israel, and this is Bezalel Coronel, who has been named the Gabbai for Terra Santa, or treasurer for Terra Santa of that year. In 1639, the three communities merged into one. It's called Talmud Torah, although most people know it as the Portuguese Jewish community of Amsterdam. It's called Portuguese because the Portuguese were there first, and other communities are called SMP, Spanish and Portuguese, but the Amsterdam retained the name Portuguese. This is one of the articles in the original escamot or statutes of that community, and it establishes that there should be a gabai for Terra Santa, a treasurer that kept records and was responsible for receiving and distributing the money to Eretz Israel. In London, later, they followed this example, and they also had a gabai. And in their first statutes, it is stipulated there should be two distinct boxes, each labeled, in which everyone could depose their gifts for either Terra Santa or for the cautivos. And this was then to go into the hands of the gabai for Terra Santa, who was to keep track of the money. A very special feature for the way Amsterdam had organized its support for Eretz Israel is the Lista. And the Lista is a list of persons and institutions in Eretz Israel, in the beginning in Jerusalem, Hebron, and Safed, with the amount of money that each of these persons or institutions was to receive. And we call that, in modern terms, an earmarked list. The people in Jerusalem had no authority to distribute money outside that list, except for one sum of money which was meant for the general poor in Jerusalem. Each list, and this is the first one, begins with a short introduction, which is at the top, and in the beginning it says nothing else than noticia dos pessoas particulares in Jerusalem who were to receive money from Amsterdam. And later, these headings had more information. They stipulated how the money was to be sent to Eretz Israel. And the very first mention of place in between Amsterdam and Jerusalem was in 1652, when it said that the money was to go to Livorno first, and from there to Jerusalem. And then from 1682 until 1712, it was also sent to Livorno. I'm sure it happened in between as well. In Livorno, the money was changed from guilders, given by the Dutch, into patacons. And the patacon is a currency that was more useful in Eretz Israel. One patacon is about 1 guilder, and 1 guilder is today half of a euro or half of a pound. These amounts don't look like much, but it was the currency back then, and for that kind of money you could buy much more than today. So, this entry from 1744 says that the money has to go to Constantinople instead of Livorno. And from 1744, the money went from Amsterdam to Constantinople. And the reason for that was that Constantinople established an institution called the Picadine in 1728, and all the money from all over the world meant for Eretz Israel was channeled through Constantinople. In Jerusalem, the money was to be divided by the Mahamat. No, sorry, by the chief rabbi. In Amsterdam, you had a Mahamat, and that was a board, and they governed the community, and the Chachams or rabbis were in the service of the community and had to listen to the Mahamat. In Jerusalem, there was no Mahamat, or at least I have never read that there was one. But in Jerusalem, the chief rabbis were in charge, and they were charged with the distribution of the money according to these listas. So each year, the money accompanied by the Lista and by a letter from Amsterdam to Jerusalem went its way through Livorno or Constantinople in 1744. The letter went to Constantinople, and this letter is special because it mentions the family Abulafia and their involvement in re-establishing a Jewish settlement in Tiberias. And who were on these lists? Well, we could say the poor and the pious, the orphans and the widows. Here's a list of the same list that I showed before, 1744, with the names of a few of the Chachams. There could be as many as 30 Chachams or rabbis on such a list. And what you see here is Portuguese names, Spanish names, Arabic names, and the majority of them were Sephardim, Portuguese Jews. The Sephardim of Amsterdam and later London did not give towards Ashkenazim. In the beginning, there was a simple explanation for that. There were no Ashkenazim in Jerusalem. They came circa 1700, and then that ended in a disaster. And most of them went away again, and there were later new tries to establish Ashkenazim in Jerusalem as well, and this took off circa 1740. But by then, Amsterdam had the habit to only give to its own communities in Jerusalem, to its own people, Sephardim. Next on the list are widows, and some of those are widows of former Chachams or rabbis. You see here the names of Isaac Parenta, who have apparently died, Sol de Sechem, Isaac Bouton, who I suspect might have been bitten, Chaim Pharaoh, and others. And then there were orphans on the list. Again, we have a few here, and some of them also were children of Chachams who had died in the meantime. You see here, for example, a daughter of Rabbi Semach Hermesano, who I am sure was really Gormesano, and sometimes named Gomez Sano. Next on the list are the poor from Jerusalem. And here we see also this mix of Portuguese names, Spanish names. There's even a Pardo here. But Arrobes is, I think, Spanish. Radico, Spanish. Benyari, Arabic name. Maestro is Portuguese, maybe. And the list is concluded by some payments toward the general community, and some of it was meant for the general poor of Jerusalem, and maybe there were some Ashkenazim among them. But the chief rabbis of Jerusalem were free to spend these 70 patakons up above to their own poor. If they did so, we don't know. What we also see here is the gift for Safed, 60 patakons. Well, Safed was much smaller than Jerusalem. That explains the difference in the money. And here is also money destined for yeshivas. One of them is from David Vaz, the other is from Moses Franco Drago, and there were others in Hebron and also in Jerusalem. And the lists are signed off by the members of the Mahamat in Amsterdam. So this is the Mahamat of the year 1744. There were somewhere between 50 and 150 people on those lists. It started with some 50 in 1639 and it grew gradually to 150. And you are allowed to multiply that number by 4, which was the average size of a family. So you would come to a figure of some 600 people who received money from Amsterdam. And from other reports about Jerusalem, we hear that there were some thousands Jews in Jerusalem. So that meant that about 60% of the population of Jerusalem was dependent on this sort of support. But of course, Amsterdam wasn't the only community that gave, and there was another form of funding the communities in Eretz Israel. They sent out regularly shaliachs or Seluhim to go out over the world and collect money. Sephardic Seluhims went mostly to Western Europe, to Italy, and in later years they even crossed over to the Americas. I hope to say some more about them shortly. But I mentioned that the support for Eretz Israel was organized differently from 1728 on. And this also had consequences for the gifts from Amsterdam. The money went through Constantinople, but it also meant that you see the poor that were on the list from 1639 to roughly 1728 disappeared from the list. Amsterdam only gave to the Chachams, to their widows, to their orphans from that point on. Those who were on the list in 1728 continued to receive in the years after, to receive money, but they were not replaced with new poor. And after a while, it's only Chachams and the widows and their offspring receiving money. Here's a list from Hebron, and it's Chachams. From 1791, which is one of the last listas that there are. I mentioned the letter that accompanied the Lista to Constantinople, and there were other letters to Jerusalem, to Hebron, and to Safed, and later to Tiberias. These letters have been preserved in the so-called copiadors, and those are copybooks of letters. In Amsterdam, they start in 1700. They are not completely available anymore, and some of them are in a bad shape. The letters from London were not copied into a copiador, but directly into the minute books of the Mahamat. But Amsterdam and London also received letters back. And this is a thank you letter from Hebron from circa 1744. And with this letter, the circle is closed. The money goes from Amsterdam to Constantinople, to Jerusalem, to Safed, to Hebron. With the letters, the money is distributed, and the people in Hebron and Jerusalem and Safed wrote letters back to Amsterdam. Unfortunately, not only a very few of these letters survive, but the ones that are have these great signatures, which are always a joy to watch. I have been transcribing these lists over the years, and I have done most, but in the last few years it stopped a bit, and I have to do a few years more. And when done, I hope to publish them somewhere, but I also have to do some more background research. And it's a very difficult process because each year there's a different hand in which these lists are noted. And the language switches from Spanish to Portuguese and back, depending on the clerk who wrote them. In due time, it will be a beautiful coffee book. Everyone will know that it's important and nobody will read it. But people will be able to find maybe a lost family in there. If you do family research in London or in Amsterdam or elsewhere, and you can't find any place where somebody was buried or died, then you might just take a look at these lists, because there was a steady trickle from Amsterdam, and I'm sure also from London to Jerusalem, because of the fascination that Jerusalem held for a lot of people. And especially people late in life tended to go to Eretz Israel, to die there, to be buried there, and to be nearer to God. Where did these people come from? Mostly the listas don't say so. But there are a few instances where places of origin are mentioned. And Western Europe, Hamburg, Amsterdam, Bordeaux, Bayonne, London. Portugal, Troncoso, Moncorvo, Mauro, Villeflor, Viseu, Castanho, Sa, Leiria. So you see, during the 17th century especially, and also a bit in the 18th century, that still Jews were fleeing Portugal and going to Eretz Israel directly. There were also people from Spain, Toledo, Madrid, Burgos, Italy, of course, North Africa, and from the Balkan. And I forgot to sum up here Corfu. These listas have been the subject of discussion. In 1707, Moses Haggis, a Shaliach, who was sent out from Jerusalem to collect money, arrived in Amsterdam. And in Amsterdam, he was impressed, but also a bit embarrassed by the wealth of the Portuguese Jews. And they thought that they could give much, much, much more money towards Israel. He thought that they had the duty to do so. But in Amsterdam, they thought that they gave enough. After all, they gave each year somewhere between 800 and 1500 guilders. And if you look at the total household of the Amsterdam community, it's between 40,000 and 60,000 guilders a year, depending on how many poor they had, depending on the income. So that's about 2% of the Amsterdam income that went to Eretz Israel. These days, we are glad if a country gives 1% of its income to underdeveloped countries. So I would argue that's quite a lot. And of course, nobody wants to pay more taxes than they do. It was also argued against the Listas because the Eurozone leaders had no say in its distribution. There was a list and they had to distribute the money according to the list. And there was but a small amount of money with which they could do as they liked. But if they had been able to do as they liked with that money, then maybe something would have happened like happened with the money that came from Constantinople. In Constantinople in 1760, about 1760, they discovered that the money that they had been sending did not go to the poor, but went into constructing a new synagogue. And they hadn't been able to do anything about it. Also, it happened that money was embezzled by corrupt clerks. And so there's also something to say for the Listas. It was earmarked money and it could not be distributed otherwise. Of course, we don't know for sure if that's the case. It could also have been that there was embezzlement of Amsterdam money and not everyone got what they needed. But we see no sign of that in the correspondence between Amsterdam and Jerusalem. So I assume that everything went according to plan. And another thing that we might say is that in all those years that I've seen, there's not one time that the money did not arrive in Jerusalem. And one would have thought that with all those pirates in the middle, in the Mediterranean about, it would have been possible that ships would have been captured, that the money would have been lost. There was one time, there was a war going on and Amsterdam had not been able to send its money. So they sent twice the amount at a later date. Another thing that was held against the Listas was that there was no money given to the Ashkenazim. But I think that's more for another discussion. Over to London. London organized its support for Eretz Israel in more or less the same way as Amsterdam. Both communities did not have a separate charity for Terra Santa and Cautivos, because the community thought that there was an obligation for the whole of the community and not for a special charity. And they wanted to keep a tight control of this charity. So this has fooled researchers in the past who came to Amsterdam looking for the charity Terra Santa and found out it didn't exist. But in a way, the whole of the community was the charity Terra Santa. And what you see is that in Amsterdam and in London, the justification or the accounting of the money that went from Amsterdam and London to Eretz Israel was done in the general registers of the community rather than in a separate register for a separate charity. They also had a gabbai. And here is Moses Mokata, who has been nominated as the gabbai of Terra Santa and Cautivas. In Amsterdam, those two were split. In London, they were united in one person. And I don't know, David, is that still the case? Do we have gabbai for Terra Santa? I can't hear you. Anyway. Let me see a bit more about London. The oldest resolution book of the Mahamat of the London community has been published, and we know from the first Eschamat that there were to be two boxes, one for Terra Santa, one for the Cautivas. But it's only in a few years later, in 1671, that we find the first gifts from London towards Eretz Israel. And it's but a small amount of money, 3 pounds, 5 pounds, later 10 pounds. One has to remember though that a pound was 10 times more worse than a guilder. So if Amsterdam gave 100 guilders, the equivalent in London would have been 10 pounds. But it grew, and it grew steadily. And here we see an entry from the annual accounts of London from 1708. And here we see that London gave 134 pounds in total, which is 1,300 guilders. And with that kind of money, they had already surpassed Amsterdam as a source of money for the Eretz Israel. The money went mostly to Jerusalem, which was the biggest community, then to Safed, then to Hebron, which was a lot smaller. not yet to Tiberias. The first shaliach that came from Jerusalem, no, not from Jerusalem, from Hebron to London was Seluhim, and he brought sad news. People in Hebron lived in dire poverty, and he came to collect money for that community, and they organized a collection, and he managed to send the money to Hebron, but he himself stayed in London because they were taken so much by Seluhim in London that they decided to keep him as a Chacham. That it didn't end well, because after a while they found out that he was a follower of Sabda SV, and in 1701 they fired him, and he was succeeded by David Nieto. Ion went to Amsterdam and didn't have much luck there also, and he came into direct conflict with Moses Haggis, whose name I mentioned before. The two were insultive of each other, and both were put down by the Maramat. But animosities between the two continued. It did not have an effect on the willingness of the London and Amsterdam community to keep on giving towards Terra Santa. The giving of money to Eretz Israel was not questioned until about 1751, when Isaac de Pinto, a philosopher who lived in Amsterdam and in London, started to say, why do we have to pay for all the poor in all the world? But even after that, the giving continued. In another year, 1706, the community received another shaliach, or Seluhim, from Jerusalem, and he had such terrible stories to tell that they decided to hold a special collection. And the amount of money that they collected, it's just not completely visible here, was £1,000. So that was 10,000 guilders. And in today's money, that would be about 70,000 euros. I do not know if a collection was held today, if Bevis Marks will be able to collect a similar sum of money for Eretz Israel. It's extraordinary. And not only London gave, but they also sent letters to Barbados and to Jamaica. And they received money from there also. So part of that sum of £1,000 came from Jamaica, and part of that came from Barbados. And we see in later years that Barbados and Jamaica continued to give through London, but at a certain moment they started receiving shaliachs of their own, and they gave the money to them. They established a charity for Terra Santa and collected the money over the years. When the shaliach came, he was given the money. Or if they didn't like him enough, they gave him half of the money and kept the rest for another time. The money was again divided but not in the Amsterdam way through Listas. No, the money went to specific persons in Jerusalem, like Abraham Rovigo and Jacob Bar Simon. Some of the money went to Safed, and some other money went to Hebron. One of the last times that money was solicited from Jamaica through London was in 1733. They were informed that there were troubles in Hebron, and they were asked to contribute to that. I'm sorry, the letter. Oh yeah. I went one slide further than I thought I was. Those Shaliach also met with resistance because of the Amsterdam and London regular gifts towards Eretz Israel. They gave each year, and once in 5-10 years, a Shaliach or Seluhim would arrive from Jerusalem and ask for even more. So what he did was write to Constantinople and say, please send us no more Shaliachs. We give already, and we give it each year, and there's no need for them to come. And in this letter it says that they ask for muy discretas razones, very discreet reasons, and they don't spell them out, which is a pity, of course, for us. What they did in Amsterdam is they sent a letter to Constantinople, please send us no more Shaliachs. But they agreed with the Shaliach who was there that they would give money towards Hebron or Jerusalem, a fixed sum of say 5,000 guilders, and then in return there will be no more Shaliachs sent from Jerusalem for a period of 5 years. This is a letter from the minute books of the Mahamat of London, and it's addressed again to Rab Abulafai, and I believe it also mentions his son Ishak Abulafai. The letter is addressed not to Tiberias, but to Izmir in the year 1740. And these are the very first reports about the re-establishment of a Jewish settlement in Tiberias. The family Abulafia from Izmir played a great role in that. And there was also a local leader, a local Arab or Muslim leader who wanted to promote Tiberias in economic ways and thought that the establishment of Jews in Tiberias would help draw merchants and merchandise towards that town. I don't know if that scheme happened like that, but from that year on, now from a few years later on, there was a Jewish settlement in Tiberias, and they were always led by rabbis with the name Abulafia or descendants from them. And they also received money from London and from Amsterdam. I'm sure there were, I know for sure that there were also other Western communities who had their own way of giving money towards Eretz Israel. There was a charity called Terra Santa in Livorno, there was one in Bordeaux, there was one on Curaçao, and there was one later in Jamaica, and there must have been also charities like that in North America. All in all, they collected vast sums of money. I have figured out that in the first 2 centuries, Amsterdam gave something like 200,000 guilders. I've not been able to calculate that in today's money. It must have been millions and millions. And together with the money that came from London and from other places in the diaspora, it must have enabled the Jews to stay in Eretz Israel. Otherwise, they would have had a much harder time keeping a Jewish presence in Israel. So when the 19th century arrived, there were these Sephardic communities, and they were slowly going more and more Ashkenazim to Eretz Israel as well. And what happened was that the systems by which money was transferred changed. The money from Amsterdam was fixed at 600 guilders a year throughout the 19th century, and because of inflation that meant less and less and less. And I've not been able to calculate the money that London gave in those years for lack of sources online, but it may have been less and less. What happened was, sorry about that, was that the way money was collected in the 19th century changed with newspapers coming and with people like Sir Moses Montefiore going directly to the Holy Land and invest money there. Newspapers made it possible to publish the stories that shaliachs used to bring all over the Sephardic world. And as a result, shaliachs were more and more replaced by more modern ways of raising money. So Moses Montefiore was a Sephardic person, but he is more or less a person in between the old and the new. He was firmly rooted in Sephardic habits and Sephardic traditions, but he also developed new ways of getting people to establish themselves in Israel. He built the first neighborhoods outside the walls of Jerusalem. He attracted Ashkenazim to the Holy Land. He gave money for agricultural undertakings. And so he also represents the more modern Israel that was about to come. But through the efforts of London, Amsterdam, and other places, there was still a community left in Israel, which maybe would not have existed without that outside support. So when the Ashkenazim came and the Zionists came, they found a community living and thriving in Israel already. So they had kind of a bridgehead. Personally, I feel that this history is underrepresented in literature, the story of the Jews in Israel under Ottoman rule. When you read books about Ottoman rule, it's always about the end of it. And there are very few books about the period before, say 16th to 19th century. Take, for instance, the book by Sebag Montefiore about Jerusalem. 20 pages in a book of about 1,000 pages written to this period in time. David, I still can't hear you, but how are we in time?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. No, we're doing fine. Can I have you finished? Or can I ask you a couple of questions?
I could talk some more about yeshivas in the Holy Land, but I don't know. It's how late is it?
It's 8 o'clock. It's 8:05.
Okay. Let's go to questions then.
Okay. Well, can I first of all start with a couple? The people from Amsterdam and London who ended up in Terra Santa, do they appear in the despachos, or did they just get their own way there?
Yes, they also appear in the despachos, and there's an early wave between brackets because it concerns maybe 20 persons from before 1639 of people who are known to have left Amsterdam for.
You have frozen
Those names.
Okay, so you froze slightly then.
Okay, my internet connection is.
You have frozen. One of us has frozen again, but I'm going to guess that you can still hear me.
Yes.
Well, one of the things that impressed me is I think the more we do genealogy, we are discovering how these Sephardic communities that we thought were quite separate from each other. So we've got our Western Sephardim, and we have our Megarashim, Berberiscos in North Africa, and Levantinos in the Ottoman Empire. But if our community was actually paying to support members of these other communities, that surely says quite a lot. Oh dear, Ton has disappeared on me. Let me just see if he is still here. I'm sorry, everyone, for all the. And no, Ton is still here. For some reason, he has become muted. So please.
Can you hear me again? Okay.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was asking about the relationship between the different Sephardic communities, because growing up, I always thought that we were completely separate. And the more I get into genealogy, we keep finding so many crossovers, and surely the fact that Amsterdam and London are willing to pay for people from not just Saleh but from Salonika and other places suggests that they see they see a more sort of unified Sephardic community than perhaps we imagined.
Yes, I'm sure of that. There was a lot of correspondence between the communities going on. You can see that in the Amsterdam Copiador and in the copies of letters in the minute books in London. Each year, a dozen or maybe 20 letters went out from Amsterdam to The Hague, to London, to New York, to once even to Jamaica, a lot to Curacao, to Suriname, but also to Jerusalem, Hebron, Safed, Livorno, Constantinople, Bordeaux, Hamburg. It was a network, and I have the feeling that they were very well connected. Amsterdam seems to be a sort of central point in all those connections. And one of the reasons for that is the Santa Compagnia de Dotar, a charity which doled out dowries to young brides and young lady orphans. And they had a network all over the world of correspondence, and they knew what was going on in Brazil, in New York, on Curacao, in Venice, and in Eretz Israel. It was very much interconnected.
Yeah.
And also, people went up and down. And one point I failed to make about the Shaliach is that they represented the Holy Land in other countries. They were able to tell first-hand stories about life in Israel that otherwise would not have reached Amsterdam or other countries other than by letter. And someone telling stories is always a better communicator of stories than the written word, I think.
Yeah, but I was curious to see how much money was being paid to Safed, to Tzvat, which is the center of Jewish mysticism, which of course communities like London really didn't like. But I'm assuming it was the same then, that it was the center of mysticism. So almost.
And not everyone in London,
Hmm?
not everyone in London and Amsterdam did not like Shabbatai Zvi. He had his admirers.
No, I'm not talking about Shabbatai Tzvi. I'm just talking about sort of that whole mystical approach to to Judaism, which one of my friends once described as witchcraft. You know, in the Spanish and Portuguese, we're still not very keen on that sort of thing, and yet they were paying for it. And I'm guessing that in somewhere like Tzvat, we're going to see a lot more people, perhaps from Morocco and the Ottoman Empire, and I'm just impressed.
Unfortunately, the Listas do not have many names from Sfard. Only the head rabbi was mentioned, and almost nobody else. But Hebron might be more interesting. And Hebron was a center of mysticism and support for Shabbatai Zvi. And one of the reasons for that was an Amsterdam rich merchant, Abraham Israel Pereira, who established a yeshiva in Hebron in his own name. And Gershom Scholem, in his biography of Shabbatai Zvi, mentioned that very yeshiva as a center of mysticism. Abraham Israel Pereira was a follower of Shabbatai Zvi himself, and the story goes that in 1666 he went to Italy and was planning to go from there to Turkey to meet with Shabbatai Zvi. But when he was in Venice, bad things had already happened. Shabbatai Zvi had converted to the Muslim religion, and Abraham Pereira went back home. But his yeshiva was still there in Hebron, and as far as I know, it continued right up to the Second World War.
Well, I think there were the Jews were kicked out of Hebron in 1920.
Yeah, that's correct.
Several people have asked about the actual mechanics of transferring money. Were these just bills of exchange, or were people carrying bags of gold? Or
it was how do you call it? Coins. It was an amount of money in coins. And it went from Amsterdam with a skipper they trusted, and we know their names, but because they are also mentioned in in the Listas, for instance, William Klaassen and Jost Klaassen. And they took the money from Amsterdam to Livorno, and maybe also from there to Eretz Israel. I don't know. What happened is that the ship that carried the money was part of a convoy of several ships, and in the Mediterranean they also had a marine ship accompanying them to protect them from pirates and from foreign interference.
Okay.
So it's about 10 to 20 ships who sailed together with a warship accompanying them and keeping the money safe. And that's why the money arrived. And then the money must have gone overland to Jerusalem and distributed from there.
Okay, Kevin is commenting that the Sephardim were famous for their mysticism, just not the London variety. We're still not very keen on that. So I'm just looking through the questions and say if anyone has a question, please type. I'm just going back. I actually saw, I'll have to ask you later, I saw names like De La Maya, which I've seen in my own family, but have never found anybody in London or Amsterdam or anyone else with that name. I have to look more closely later. Does anyone have any questions? There's mention of book by Amnon Cohen. So presumably Livorno and Hamburg and other congregations are equally putting money into Terra Santa, I would assume.
Yes, but these charities tended to keep the money until Shaliach arrived, and then they gave him the money.
Okay.
That happened in Bordeaux, that happened in Livorno, and the book to read is from, let me get it. It's called Emissaries from the Holy Land, and it's written by Matthias B. Lehmann.
Okay.
Very good book, very insightful, and he has tried to tell the stories about all the shaliachs he could find. And Jacob Barnay has written a book about the 18th century and the support from Constantinople to Eretz Israel. What these books have in common is that they miss the importance of London and Amsterdam for Eretz Israel.
Okay. Naldo has two questions. Can you repeat the title of the book?
The first one, Emissaries from the Holy Land.
Emissaries from the Holy Land. Great.
Matthias B. Lehmann, and Lehmann was a double N.
Okay, and he's also asking when the first listas were compiled.
In 1639, and then they continue without losing a year until 17, from the top of my head, 1712, and then there are a few years missing, and then they continue to 1791, and then there was another one in 1803. All in all, there are 140 lists for 180 years. And the beauty of those lists is if you put them one after the other, you can follow a name. in
Yes.
these lists. And sometimes you see a name rise up through the list and become a chief rabbi in Jerusalem and receiving 10 or 12 patagons, which was about the top. And then he dies, and you see his widow or his orphans. And then, you can more or less decide which year he died.
Yes. Yes.
Information we do not have from anywhere else. I must say, there's no other source like it for finding names from Jerusalem. And again, I must stress that the rich people in Jerusalem are not on those lists. And that's about half the population. Maybe that Ottoman archives still have some hidden lists of taxes that people have to pay, but I'm told that these tend to be on first name only.
Okay, Nikki is raising a good point. The lists that we've seen in Amsterdam and London, where do they come from? Are they sent by the communities in Terra Santa, or are they just individuals or compiled, or do you have any idea?
I assume that there were original lists that went up and down. What happened was the list was drawn up in Jerusalem by the rabbis, and that way they had an influence. The list went to Amsterdam for approval, and then the list came back to Jerusalem, another copy, and the money was distributed according to the list. And what they did in Amsterdam, they copied these lists into the minute books.
Okay.
And you find them there. So it's only for that reason that these lists are preserved. I haven't seen an original list anywhere until now.
Yes. Okay, thank you. That's fascinating. I just have one eye on the clock. Possibly we should wind up. Has anybody else got any further questions? Nardo says we're waiting for your book. Which we're waiting for several books.
Okay. My work cut out for me.
I mean, one of the questions we didn't ask is it's quite fascinating, these people coming from directly from Portugal and from Spain. I mean, who are they? and what's their relationships to everyone else? I mean, if they're going directly from Portugal to Terra Santa, that presumably suggests that in Portugal they must have some sort of Jewish belief or identity, or it might suggest that. It's it's really fascinating.
I've not done this systematically, but I was able to find one person mentioned in those lists, a Thomas Pinel.
Yes.
And I was able to find an Inquisition processor for him.
Okay.
So he must have escaped, or maybe he pleaded guilty, confessed, and reconciled with the Inquisition and left after that. But that's the one person I could link between Portugal and Eretz Israel, but it's the only one I tried. So maybe the others can be identified as well.
There's a PhD in there for somebody, I think. And I'd just like to say hello to Bernard, who arrived a bit late. So it's nice to see you, because I know you've not been very well of late. Shall we wind up?
Yes.
Do you want to share the the slides. I'm terrified to touch my computer in case the whole thing crashes again. Well, whilst he's doing that, can I just let everyone know the last Sunday of this year, we are going to welcome Abigail Green, who is the biographer of Moses Montefiore. Next week, we have Steve, who's been Steve Porter, who has been a stalwart supporter of us here. And I'm afraid we've asked him very, very last minute. Steve has done a lot of work. Steve comes from Jamaica and has done a lot of work on the Delgado family. And I think that's, it's really interesting at the moment. There is a huge amount of interest from and about Jamaica. So we are greatly looking forward to that. We would like to thank everyone for attending. Especially, we would like to thank our patrons. As you see, everything is computers are falling to bits. I am actually getting myself a new computer soon, but thank you, because you've our patrons. You kept the show on the road. And if anyone else wants to become a patron, you know, even just giving a very small amount of money every month, that would be gratefully received. If anybody here needs any help with their genealogy, especially with relationship to applying for Portuguese nationality, we would be very happy to hear from you at contact@sephardicgenealogy.com. So it is left to me to thank Ton for absolutely fascinating talk. Yeah, like all the best talks, it perhaps raises as many questions as it answers, but it also has brought us a significant new source. Thank you very much, everybody, and we will look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you, and see you next week.
Okay, good night.
Good night.